Hello, everybody. It is Sunday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our Steelers post-game show by Post-Gazette sports columnist Paul Zeise after, Paul, what I thought was a pretty workmanlike effort from the Steelers. Going into the season, I think if you said, what is the template? What's the model? What's it look like when everything's working the way it's supposed to? I think this is the game that you pick, right? It's not perfect. You can certainly nitpick things. I don't know if this was Russell Wilson's best game. I don't know if this was anyone's best game, but it all came together in a relatively comfortable win. Got dragged out there a little bit at the end, but workmanlike was the word that came to my mind before we get into the show, nitty gritty style. What was your read on the top line here?
Well, I mean, Adam, this is life without George Pickens. I mean, once we found out before the game that he was inactive, he was not going to be playing, obviously. You and I have been talking for, year and a half now, 2 years almost, about the receiving core behind George Pickens. And, I kind of expected it to be this kind of game. I said the only thing that really matters is to get a win. Whatever it takes to get a win today, just get a win. I knew the offense was going to be a little choppy. It was going to be, kind of like you said, a sort of a throwback to what they were. I was not shocked by anything. I knew also that Jameis Winston would throw the ball to the Steelers a few times because that's what he does. And I figured their defense would be good enough to win the game. If you would have told me before the game 27-14, I probably would have said, yeah, or whatever. It was 27-14, or whatever it was. I would have said something like that, 23-14, 23-13, that kind of game. I didn't expect it to be 41 points. I didn't expect the Browns to do, what they did the last time on offense. It's the 10th win of the season, Adam. And it's the divisional win. It avenges the loss from a few weeks ago. All I will tell you is the most important thing about this game was they got to win. They got to win. Now, I mean, let's hope for their sake that they don't have to play a playoff game or something without George Pickens, because I think it was a little bit ugly. But they found a way to get it done.
Yes, we're going to get into all of that. Russell Wilson, the receivers, maybe the running game, and then, of course, the defense. Before we do, just want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560. To get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. Paul, we usually start these shows talking about the quarterbacks, so let's just get into Russell Wilson's day a little bit here. 15-26, 158 yards, 6.1 on the average per attempts, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, took the 1 sack, and had a passer rating of 101.1. Like I said at the jump, I don't think it was his best start as a Steeler. But I think this is part, maybe a better example of why you go out and get a guy like this. Compared to last season, because the floor just seems so much higher, Paul. It's a professional effort as opposed to the inconsistency that you saw at quarterback. The problem wasn't necessarily that Kenny Pickett couldn't have good games. We saw Kenny Pickett have good games. We saw Mason Rudolph have good games. It's just that the consistent floor for Russell Wilson seems to be so much higher than what they've been used to since Ben Roethlisberger, and arguably for the last couple of years of Ben Roethlisberger's career. Does this game maybe even tell you a little bit more than last week than when he's going off for 400 yards, just because he can not have his best stuff and still put together a very solid winning effort?
Well, I mean, I think the key stat you read off was 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, right? I mean, that's the one thing. He doesn't turn the ball over. And so, with this defense that they have, even though they've had some leaks in the last few weeks, if you don't put them in bad situations, you probably are going to have a really good chance of winning the game. I mean, we're talking about him not having his best stuff, and his passer rating was over 100. You've used the word probably 3 times, and it just really describes it, workmanlike. And when you get an elite quarterback and you have a guy, and he's elite. Let's face it, he's elite. I mean, we've used borderline Hall of Famer, however you want to say it. He is a guy that the Steelers haven't had probably since before Ben Roethlisberger got hurt. And when you have that guy, all you have to do really is give him an opportunity to make enough plays to win a game. And so when he doesn't have his best stuff, when he doesn't have his best receiver, he didn't throw the ball over the field. He can still get first downs when they need first downs. He can still make some big plays down the field. I don't know. I mean, I have to go back to like the Killer B era, to the last time that they had this kind of quarterback play, probably. The Killer B era when Ben Roethlisberger had Bell and Antonio Brown and company, and you knew that even if they didn't have their best stuff, they could still score 20 or more points. I mean, Adam, think about it. The last 3, 4, 5 years, I mean, scoring 20 points was like a unicorn for this team. And if they scored 20, we were almost surprised. Now it's like, well, they scored 27, but the quarterback wasn't as good as he has been. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about Russell Wilson. It also tells you everything you need to know about why he's the starter and not Justin Fields, because I don't believe that Justin Fields' ceiling is anywhere close to as high as Russell Wilson's. And number two, and Adam, this might be a discussion for, during the week, or, if you join me during the week sometime or whatever, but unless something really ridiculously goofy happens in the next 5 weeks, I'm looking at their quarterback for at least the next 2 years. I mean, they've got to sign Russell Wilson for at least, like I said, and we've talked about it, 2 years, 70, 75, maybe even $80 million. But he's worth it. He's showing why he's worth it. They haven't had this kind of quarterback play, like I said, since before Ben Roethlisberger got hurt. So to me, that the fact that we're not impressed and they scored 27 points is incredible if you think about it, what they've averaged in the last few years and everything else.
Yeah, I think you can see a future with Russell Wilson. And I was, admittedly, I lean more towards Fields in this whole conversation because my thought was Russell Wilson is on the decline. And I think the reason that you've reversed that conversation is because it's clear that he's not on the decline. Is he quite as good as he was in his prime? Probably not. But can he be kind of like that Ben Roethlisberger late in the Killer Bees era that you mentioned where, he was very good well into his 30s, and it wasn't really until that elbow injury in 2019 that he somewhat turned into a pumpkin. But Russell Wilson still has the physical skills to go with the mental skills of knowing where the ball needs to go and all of that. Paul, I want to get into the receivers because I think they were kind of the story of the day with George Pickens not playing and then some other guys getting some opportunities. Let's start with Pickens. A lot of conspiracy theories online about related to the trash talk when they were in Cleveland a couple of weeks ago, the tussle with Greg Newsome and kind of keeping him out of whatever that was going to be had he played. Do you believe any of the conspiracy theories? Do you think there was anything more to it than a hamstring injury, or are you inclined to take the Steelers at their word?
I'm inclined to take the Steelers at their word. I mean, this was too important of a game, and against the team that they had just lost to. If it was a game against the Arizona Cardinals or something, I still probably take them at their word, but I can't believe that they would, in a division game, jeopardize, the ability to win the game based on all of that stuff. I don't believe that it was like a soft suspension or if it was, any of that kind of stuff. I mean, I think he was legitimately hurt. Here's the thing, okay? I believe this more than I believe the soft suspension stuff or whatever. If it was a game they absolutely needed to win, was he healthy enough to play? That's the question. Because it wouldn't shock me if they basically erred on the side of caution and said, listen, we need him for the next, 4 weeks and beyond. So if he's a little bit tweaked right now, what we don't want is him running a fly route or something, or him running a go route and then, full blown tearing his hamstring. And then at that point, now we're without him for the playoffs. So if you are asking about conspiracies, I guess that's one there that I would say, yeah, okay, might be able to buy that he might have been healthy enough. If they absolutely needed him to play, he could have played. And they decided that, we're going to err on the side of caution and keep him out because we don't want him getting hurt. That makes a little more sense to me.
Well, the closest I'll get to conspiracy is that, kind of a combination of what you're saying of They don't want to get him hurt, and he's on a team that season's over, that he trash talked pretty relentlessly, and that those guys might have been incentivized to try to take his head off and make whatever injury he had worse. And if they'd known going into the game that he's got an injury, the Browns have nothing to lose, and maybe they mess with him. So to the extent that any of that stuff kind of played into it, I could maybe see that, but that's as close as I'm willing to get. I'm sure it was very much rooted in injury. Paul, George Pickens' absence did open up some things for opportunities for some other guys. Scotty Miller left witness protection today and had 3 catches for 38 yards. Mike Williams comes off the bench, 3 for 36. Van Jefferson had the 1 for 10, but it was a touchdown. Calvin Austin gets 1 for 4. You seemed not impressed by what the Steelers showed from the receivers group beyond George Pickens. I guess I want to just dig a little more into what you saw from those guys and your belief that, let's just play, forward a little bit here. If the game's next week and George Pickens is in a similar situation, can you win with these guys against the Eagles? Can you win in the playoffs with these guys? Did you see enough to maybe, believe that Russell Wilson can put those guys in the right positions to succeed? Or was this the same thing you and I have been talking about on these shows for a couple of years now of this just isn't good enough?
Well, what is it? What was it, 8 or 9? It was 8 or 9 different guys caught the ball today. I mean, something like
half
that.
Of their tight ends, I think.
Yeah. Well, my point is, they did. Russell Wilson spreads it around well, and because he's really good, it's hiding some of the flaws they might have had on the receiving core. But Adam, I don't think you beat the Eagles next week if you don't have George Pickens. I just don't believe that you're going to be able to score enough points against that team. The Browns are one thing. And the Browns also, you realize when you play the Browns, they're going to give you some free ones probably. The Eagles, it's a different animal altogether. And I think if you look at what the Steelers did today, the 2 things that stand out to me. Number one, I had actually 3 things. Number one, I actually forgot Scotty Miller was on the team. To be brutally honest with you, I forgot he was even on the team. And so it was nice to see him make a few plays. 2, for all the people, it seems like every single week in my mailbag I get a question about why Mike Williams doesn't ever get to play, why they don't throw it to him, why they don't use him, why did they trade for him if they're not going to use him, all that stuff. Well, you know what? Today he proved that he was a valuable depth piece for them. With Pickens out, he was able to step in and give them a couple of catches that they needed. And then, of course, there's the other thing, Adam. I'm starting to believe that there is so much more that they could get out of Pat Freiermuth. And I thought today, he stretched the field a little bit and he was able to do some really good things down the field for them. I thought, he had some good some big catches, some big plays. I think he can be a bigger part of the offense than he even is. So, do I think they can win without George Pickens against the Eagles or maybe some of the better teams? Probably not. But I do think that when they don't have him, we get to see the fact that maybe there's some other ways that they can attack teams. And one of them, at least in my mind, is using Pat Freiermuth more.
I want to pull at that Pat Freiermuth thread here in a minute just to wrap up with the receivers, Paul. With Mike Williams, I think a lot of us talked about him, his acquisition in terms of improving the receivers room as a whole, having a better option than some of these guys that they had. We had not seen much of him since Washington comes in today. Should we better understand that trade as them taking out an insurance policy on George Pickens and saying, this is a guy who can be a reasonable facsimile of Pickens, who can do similar things, albeit not quite as well. Is that a better way to understand the trade than them going out to get this guy to have him be a regular part of the offense, considering he's been here for more than a month now? And it took George Pickens being out for him to, be involved with any consistency?
No, absolutely. I mean, I thought they were just adding depth to the receiving core. And I think that one of the things that they probably have seen, and we talked about this from him at practices, is that Mike Williams is probably not going to help you very much underneath, and running other routes, but he can still stretch the field a little bit. And that's what George Pickens does. And so at least if you have him out there, there's a little bit of a threat to stretch the field, and if Pickens is not there, you can still at least operate the offense. Because honestly, that's a big part of, what happens with this team and what's happened with it. One is bad quarterback play over the course of the last few years. But the other part of it is they really didn't have anyone until they got George Pickens. And then, he was a rookie and all that other stuff. They didn't really have anybody that scared you all that much. So, if you can get out, it's going to be a situation where Mike Williams probably isn't going to factor that much into the offense unless there's an injury. But that's what you do if you're a good team. You go out and you get, hey, listen, you identify. We need, some help here. We need some help there. Let's see if we can do that so that we go down the stretch. If somebody goes down, we're not lost.
Yeah, I agree. Paul, I want to go back to the Pat Freiermuth conversation. How good do you think he can be, and how good do you think he needs to be for this team to be a Super Bowl contender? I wrote last week in my I do a questions post that goes on postgazette.com after the game. Look around the NFL at storylines that are relevant to the Steelers, but also, Steelers storylines that are relevant and worth thinking about going into future weeks. And it was the question I had is, can he become a dominant force? Can he be, I don't want to say like Travis Kelce, because I don't think we're ever going to see a player like Travis Kelce, but we've seen how important Travis Kelce was to postseason runs for Kansas City. And I don't think there's any argument that you can win a Super Bowl if Pat Freiermuth isn't a big part of it. So what's your read on whether he can be the player the Steelers need him to be if they're going to beat these good teams, and the recent run that he's been on that's suggesting maybe he's heading toward being more involved than we've seen him over, especially the most year and a half.
Yeah, I think the thing about him is he's never going to be that dominant blocker for them. He's never going to be that guy at tight end where he's sort of a dual tight end. He's okay as a blocker. He's not great. He's not horrible, but he's not great either. But I think he can become a really important part of their passing game. I think he's underutilized even still. They threw it to him. What do you have? 3 catches today. How many targets did he have? Real quick. 3 targets, 3 catches. To me, I think he's a guy you probably want to throw to 6, 7, 8 times even in a game, maybe 6 or 7 times. Because I think he can make plays. That's the big thing with him. He can make plays. And this team needs playmakers, the running game today was a little sputtered. It wasn't what it used to, Najee had a couple of good runs or whatever, but for the most part, if you look at it, 3.4 yards per carry. I think their running game could be better than that, but I also think that if you start throwing the ball to Pat Freiermuth with any amount of regularity, I think he'll make plays for you. But I also think he has a chance to be one of your actual playmakers, right? You got Pickens who can make plays. Who else, if you're going to dial up a play, then, I don't know that really there's anybody else you feel all that confident in yet as a playmaker. Now, all these guys are reasonably good. But my point is Pat Freiermuth is a guy I think can become that sort of that next level where he's somebody, it's 3rd and 8. We're going to throw it to him. He's going to catch it and make a play. It's 3rd and 5. It's 1st and 10 and we're going to throw a seam route to him and he's going to make 25 yards. I think he can be that guy.
Paul, I did want to ask you about the running game because I had it written down. It was, I think, pretty deep into the 3rd quarter. They were at 103 yards on whatever number of carries it was, and they were averaging 4.7. Then in the 4th quarter, when they're trying to close out that game, not very efficient at all. Obviously, you have the big fumble with Cordero Patterson. I don't want to say it let the Browns back into the game, but it certainly made the proceedings more dramatic than they needed to be. What did you think about the day that they had, considering I think it started well, and then, in crunch time, they just didn't have what they had earlier in the game, especially there were several carries by Jaylen Warren in a row there. Where he was running well, and then that success just kind of dried up. So kind of an inconsistent day from that group.
Let me ask you a question. Are they splitting the carries too much?
I've asked that question on this show before, Paul. I wonder if these guys are struggling to get into a rhythm. And I've asked this more from a Najee perspective of whether playing with Jaylen Warren disrupts Najee's rhythm a little bit more. I think we see less of that with Jaylen Warren because I think he's that's his role, right? Is to come in and spell the number one back. And so I think, and that's why, especially last year, a little less so this year, but last year, a lot of people were calling for a lot more Jaylen Warren. I think for this exact reason of, Jaylen Warren was able to come in, rip off a few carries, look really good, and then you put Najee in as in more of the lead role. I just wonder if Najee's more of a rhythm guy, but he seems to be okay with it too. So I don't know. It just seems like since Jaylen Warren came back this season, things have gotten a little less consistent for Najee Harris, and I wonder if the rhythm is part of that.
Well, I mean, it was only 4 carries, but why are we handing the ball to Cordell Patterson ever? I don't understand that. I mean, they seem to have package for him every single week where they put him in there certain plays and they put him in. It's like you've got 2 running backs. Let them handle the ball. And I don't know if it's a rhythm thing or not, but I do think it really, really feels to me a lot like they are trying too hard to, keep their guys fresh or something. I don't know. I know that most running backs, if you talk to them, they like to get, into a rhythm. They like to go. They like to get the ball. They like to hammer it away. And I feel like, there's just too much in and out going on for either of them to really get going. Again, it was only 4 carries for Cordell Patterson. It felt like it was more. I don't know how many, total snaps he played, but I just don't know why you need 3 of them.
Yeah, unless you're carrying it 40 times a game, which you're not. I believe, let me look at the box score here. 16 for Najee, 9 for Jaylen Warren, 4 for Cordell Patterson. So, and then 6 for Russell Wilson. So you take those 6 out of there, that's 29 carries for the team. That used to be a reasonable workload in the 90s for one back, Paul. Justin in the chat, before we wrap up on offense here, says, thank you, Justin, for your tip. He said, I know we didn't have George, but it seems as though Russ threw the ball in the sideline 4 or 5 times after his first read. He'd like to hear your thoughts on, basically how Russ handled the absence of Pickens.
Part of that might just be taking care of the football, right? Not taking sacks, taking care of the football. I mean, that's what you want from your quarterback. When you're shorthanded, that's what you want from your quarterback. I mean, I think we're not used to that. We're not used to quarterback making the right decisions and making good decisions with the ball. I feel like, I have no problem with what Russell Wilson's doing ever, because I know he knows what he's doing. And that's the key to me. He knows what he's doing and he knows how he's doing it, for sure.
We're going to get to some defense and some big picture questions here before we wrap up the show. Before we do, just want to thank another couple of sponsors. It's Goldberg, Persky & White. If you were diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call your local attorneys at Goldberg, Persky & White. For over 40 years, their firm has represented thousands of lung cancer and mesothelioma victims. Call 1-800-COMPLEX or visit gpwlaw.com for a free consultation. Also want to thank Archie's. The game is always on at Archie's on Carson, Pittsburgh's best place for food, drinks, and sports. Open Sundays for the game, 12 p.m. to 2 a.m. Be sure to check out their daily drink specials and stop by for 80-cent wing nights Monday through Thursday. Tell them Paul Zeise sent you. Paul, you going to be down there at Archie's?
I'll be there tomorrow, absolutely.
Well, head down if you want to check out a game with Paul. Monday night game will be on. Plenty of good stuff going on at Archie's. Okay, Paul, let's talk about the defense. Get away with a couple missed field goals today that have helped, keep the scoring down for the Browns. Generate some turnovers, kind of get Jameis Winston to be Jameis Winston. Especially the way Jameis and Jerry Jeudy have been playing. How much credit do you give this? I guess I'd probably give them a solid B, maybe a B- for this game.
Yeah, I mean, they gave up some plays, but I think one of the things is when you're playing against Jameis Winston, you're going to give up some plays. But what I like is they kind of hung in there. And more importantly, they turned him over twice and they were able to, get a fumble. So, I mean, they really, until the fumble late by Patterson, I mean, basically they were +3 in takeaways. That is probably the bigger story than anything else because, again, Jameis Winston had a Jameis Winston kind of day, didn't he? He had 2 touchdowns. He had 2 interceptions. I thought that for the most part, they did a pretty good job of containing him. And, they did a pretty good job of containing the rushing, the running game, even though they gave up 4.2 yards per carry. I don't know. Having Alex Highsmith back helped. They were able to get after Jameis Winston. They were able to make some big stops for, I probably would agree with you. Probably a B is what I would probably do. I mean, I don't think they were great today, but I don't think they were bad. I thought they were better than good, I thought they were better than average. I thought they were, that we've seen them play better. But again, one of the most important things about the defense, and we talk about complementary football, is that they really weren't in bad situations all game. So even if they gave up some plays, the bottom line is the Browns still had a ways to go to score. And, that's going to happen sometimes where, your defense gives up some yards but didn't give up a ton of points. I mean, they basically gave up, if you want to count the missed field goal as 17 points, whatever, if that makes you feel better. But the reality of the situation is they gave up 14 points.
Patrick Queen, Deshaun Elliott, the two Ravens guys signed in the offseason, were very active today, Paul. They were the top two tacklers for the Steelers. Deshaun Elliott had 9 solo, 13 total. Patrick Queen had 5 solo, 10 total. How much credit does Omar Khan deserve for going out and getting those guys to shore up this group in the offseason? I think there's always a little risk associated with going out and taking a rival's player. If it doesn't work out, it's a high profile mistake. It's something, people are going to remind you about all the time, but these guys have, and I don't know that, especially from Queen's perspective. I think Deshaun Elliott made some impacts pretty early on. But Patrick Queen was not the best player on this defense, for the better part of a month and a half. And now it really does feel like he is that guy that this group has been missing, who can kind of do it all in the middle of that defense.
Well, I give the credit to Art Rooney for Patrick Queen because the bottom line is everybody knew he was a really good player. And Omar Khan went out, but you have to pay him. Omar Khan can want everybody that he wants to get. So I'll give Omar Khan credit for being aggressive, but obviously, you have to pay a guy like Patrick Queen, and Art Rooney did. So sometimes we don't give enough credit to that. Is that you can want whoever you want, but if your owner isn't willing to go and give you the check to go get them, you're not going to get them. Now, to me, Deshaun Elliott is a completely different animal than Patrick Queen. I mean, that's Omar Khan and Andy Weidel and that scouts and whatever. I never, ever thought he would be as an important of a player as he has been. I expected Patrick Queen to be a star because I think he's a star. And I was actually disappointed in him for, the first 4, 5, 6 games. But Deshaun Elliott has been much better than I don't know. You tell me, Adam. He's been, to me, one of the most pleasant surprises on this team this entire year. He's been really, really, really pretty good. And I didn't think he would be that kind of player for them. I didn't think he'd be a guy that, they would be able to rely on the way they do. I just didn't. I didn't think he would be that guy. But he has been every bit of that guy. And so I feel like when you look at it that way, you got to give the scouting staff and everybody who made it possible for him to come, you got to give them a lot of credit because they're the ones that deserve all the credit for that. Yeah. And he's fit in well too.
Yeah, he looks like he's been in this defense for years, and that's somebody that was not on the radar, I think, of a lot of people. I don't even know if safety was position. I did our NFL draft videos. I don't know how many times we talked about safeties other than maybe as like a 4th, 5th round type of addition. They go out aggressively, get one in free agency, and they proved that, there was definitely a need for that. Despite the fact that they were able to find guys last season, Paul, that were playing decent, opposite Minkah Fitzpatrick. And even, if Minkah was banged up at times, they were able to find just random guys who plugged into this defense well. So it was a little bit of a risk to go out and say, we're going to go get a guy with some pedigree when we've proven we can get other guys. But he's been a plus. And I don't know that those guys that we were talking about last year were pluses. Didn't notice Joey Porter a whole lot today, Paul. That's probably a good thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think he had the 1 penalty, right? Or yeah, he might have had 1 penalty. But yeah, I thought he was a little bit better today. He didn't make a lot of mistakes. He didn't get a lot of penalties. He didn't get beat a lot. If you're a corner and we're not talking about you, it means you probably had a pretty decent game. He had, I think, one penalty, right? Or if I'm not mistaken, he had one penalty, but you can live with that because he does do, pretty good things.
You just can't have 6 or 7.
You can't have 6 or 7. I think he's really good in run support too. I think he's a good football player, Adam. I think he just has had a couple of rough weeks where his physicality has hurt him.
Paul, anything from today that you're interested in seeing on Hard Knocks this week? Now, I feel like this is going to be like a weekly question now that we got this that we got this show to digest, this peek behind the curtain that we rarely get with this team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would like to probably see some of the discussions that they had early on when they were losing the game, and things weren't going well for them. I would like to sort of see what Mike Tomlin has to say in order to calm the team down, get them ready to play, and all that other stuff. But Hard Knocks to me is tremendous when it's behind the scenes stuff and mic'd up stuff. So whatever it is, I'm going to eat it up, I'm sure, unless it's a boring episode. But I think the good thing is now this is 2 weeks in a row where the Steelers are not only on, but they won. You know what I'm saying? And that's an important thing. They won the game. So it'll make for a little better video. I don't know that there was much really for Mike Tomlin to correct other than early in the game. And so that's going to be interesting to see.
Paul, obviously now all eyes shift to this big game against the Eagles. Any early thoughts on that matchup? I think we hit on a little bit in the receiver conversation of, is George Pickens going to be back or not? I think that's obviously going to be a big storyline this week. But let's just say hypothetically he is, Paul. Did you see a team today that you think can beat a team that's playing as well as Philadelphia is right now?
Without George Pickens, no, they can't beat them. And you know what? I would have to look at what their record is, but it's not good in Philadelphia. I mean, it just isn't. It hasn't been good in Philadelphia. It's a tough place for them to play. The Eagles are really good. The Steelers clearly can win the game. If they have George Pickens, I think it's going to be a really good football game. 2 really good teams going at it. You know what I mean? The good news is it's an NFC game, so if they lose, it really doesn't hurt them that much. But I'm interested to see how they measure up. I'm interested to see, how they're going to handle Jalen Hurts in that offense. I'm interested to see if they're going to be able to move the ball against that defense and can they win a game like that against a really good team? What is it, 3 or 4 weeks short of the playoffs? So it's a good, playoff primer for them. I want to see how they compete against, some people think maybe the best team in football. I'm still believing that the Lions and the Bills are the 2 best teams in football, but, the Eagles probably aren't that far off either.
Yeah, I think it's a big barometer game for this team. You and I have talked about it, all the time. And can you beat the good teams? And that's what it's going to come down to if you're going to really make the good strides that you've taken this season count, right? I think if the Steelers finish at 12, 13 wins, Paul, and they can't beat the good teams on their schedule and can't win in the playoffs, no one's going to care. So, right. This is an ability, a chance to prove, what you have been able to do. Paul, any final thoughts here before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think sometimes we get caught up in the minutia, Adam, and people get caught up in style points, and sometimes really just winning the game is all that matters. I thought today was one of those games because they were a little shorthanded, because they was, playing the Browns, and it's always a chippy kind of game where there's a lot of, emotions and things. I kind of thought if they just win this game, that's all that matters. So, we can, for all week, I'm sure we'll break down some of the things they didn't do well, and all that other stuff. And but for now, I think they kind of did what I thought they were going to do. And that was grind out a win.
Yeah, I agree. Well, everyone else, please stay tuned to the channel. We're going to have a lot more. Jerry Dulac and Ray Fittipaldo will be wrapping things up from Acrisure Stadium in a couple of hours. Monday, we have the North Shore Drive. Christopher Carter will be back with Ray Fittipaldo, I believe, again, as his guest. And then, Paul, you'll be back on Monday with your live show. We do that every day around 5 p.m. Paul, you're going to have takes, I'm sure, on this game, but also some college football takes. It's kind of takes miss in college football with this selection of the playoff bracket.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to talk about that tomorrow. All I'll say is, based on everything I've heard for the last 24 hours, Penn State apparently has a bye in the first round because they're playing the worst team that's ever made any bowl game, much less the playoffs.
Yeah, my favorite thing about that, Paul, is that it's such an easy road, but Penn State's also not a good team that's good enough to, people think they're going to tear the crap out of Southern Methodist and Boise State if they get that far. Don't you have to believe that they're a good team if you believe that this should be such an easy path? That's my question. But we can dive. No, go ahead, Paul. Finish what you're saying.
We'll get into that. I'm sure we'll get into that tomorrow. In fact, we'll do a lot more college football tomorrow. But all I will say about a certain team in the South is if you don't want to be excluded from the playoffs, don't lose to 2 6-6 teams and don't lose 3 times.
I wholly agree with that, Paul. Looking forward to more college football talk during the week. Thank you, everyone, for stopping by, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.